Juliana Huxtable is one of those amazing artists where she goes to places where people normally don't want to hear, they don't want to go to, and she takes us there with humor and with brilliance. She is at the intersection of so many dialogues, and she is also opening up this entire conversation about gender. And what I love about Juliana is that she's so prolific. She can DJ, make her own music, make film, she paints, she takes photographs, she performs, she writes poetry and prose. She is good at everything, and I'm so intrigued and fascinated by her own persona and how cool she is.
Hello.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
Nice to see you. Well,
Thank you.
When did you know that you wanted to be an artist?
When I was a child, when I was 3, I told my mom that I wanted to be an artist, or that I was an artist. Not that I wanted to be an artist, I told her that I was.
How was your time at Bard? And because I've heard so many times that you said that the teachers were not supportive and that you were trapped in your identity according to them and obsessed with putting your identity out in the work. And as far as I'm concerned, that's what artists do. They work with their identity because it's the first thing they know.
All art is about identity. Anyone who is making work, it's like naturally their identity is going to be woven into what they do. But I think women, queer people, people of color unfairly share the burden of being told that what they do is identity, even though it's not necessarily more or less about identity than what anyone else does.
And so are you totally over the trans conversation? You don't want to ever like talk about it?
I'm not over the trans conversation in so much as that's always a part of any conversation that I would have, but I don't like when things become like pathological or deterministic, when people are like, oh, you used pink here because you were born a boy and now you are a woman and that means that you like pink and that is why you have pink in this portrait. I'm like, that's a like clinical, really suffocating, uninteresting way of talking about artwork. Like to me, it's like, why I like art is because it doesn't have to be literal. I want to be imaginative about thinking about what transness could be as a category. And so that's kind of more interesting to me. And I think maybe my aversion to the more literal trans conversation is an interesting way to motivate how I think about my work or something.
One of the pivotal moments for me was when I saw your work at the Triennial in 2015, because you were author and muse at the same time, because we had that amazing 3D sculpture by Frank Benson. And when I first saw the work, I was thinking to myself, she must feel very vulnerable. The way that that sculpture is made is your own body turned into an object. And how did you feel about all the hoopla around it and the attention?
Yeah. Well, I think what most people don't realize is that the sculpture was not made for the Triennial. When I agreed to do that sculpture, it was going to be shown in one gallery in New York, one gallery in London. It's a very specific context. And I never thought it was going to be in a museum with thousands of people seeing it. Very early on in the sculpture, it wasn't even going to be fully nude. It wasn't even going to be in those colors. Those colors for the sculpture were then adapted because those were colors that I had already been using on myself.
Right.
And Nuwaubian Portrait in the new museum was that character I had already been developing for years. And so there were earlier portraits that I had done in a similar vein with a similar sort of painting. And that painting was adapted onto the sculpture after the fact. At the time, you know, I thought, well, I guess probably more good will come out of this than not. And so I never really felt super sure about wanting the sculpture to be in the show. And then after the show opened, I think my relationship with the sculpture got a bit more complicated, is one way of putting it. Sometimes it's been a source of stress. And I'm happy to be at a point where that sculpture has its own life and I have my own life.
The topic of gender is something that fascinates me and a lot of people because it's so ample and there are so many nuances and it's not just one thing or the other. What have you been discovering lately with gender that adds to your practice? I've seen great portraits that you've created recently that are interesting for people to think about.
Gender to me is like it's a lens, it's a tool, it's something that can be as complicated or as basic and reductive as you want it to be. And I think that what I find really interesting is like even the sort of like, there's so much thought, if you're thinking about gender theory, there's so many ideas and thoughts and concepts and movements that fall loosely under the rubric of like feminism or gender studies or gender activism or queer theory. And sometimes I think that those labels actually short-sight the overarching nature of what's being said. Like, I think some of the most things that have fundamentally changed the way that I see the world have come or fall under gender theory, but they're really using gender and using questions of gender and sex as a way to interrogate fundamental questions about society, power, race, culture. And so I think that one of the potentials of art and visual art especially is to do a similar thing where it's using gender as like a trope, but it's not just about gender. It's not like I'm just making work about being myself in the world. It's a way of provoking questions about identity and how identity functions and how style and fashion and counterculture and like identity on a much larger level exist in the kind of contemporary moment. And so it's about exploding gender or thinking about gender as something that's not just self-referential, I guess.
How do you get into the nightlife? And you DJ and you also throw parties, or you used to, shock value, but how did that happen?
I mean, I've always been obsessed with nightlife since I was a kid.
Why?
I don't know, it's one of those things that's just like, I found and fantasized about nightlife as a space of liberation. And I think that for me, church was really important to me growing up. I loved the music, I loved the community, I loved the glamour of church. Like, I'm Southern Black Baptist, like people, you dress up. And so, but I think that church had a lot of shortcomings for me in the sense that it was like, could be very conservative socially. Clubbing to me was almost like a form of church, but a much more free version of that or something. And so it just made sense to me that I would start DJing and throwing parties and being more involved in the creative side.
Everything feels impossible right now.
Why don't you tell me about the House of La Doja and how it started and what it means and what happens when you go there?
So House of Doja is a family at the core. It started in a dorm room in New School. Fast forward many, many, many years later, the family's only just grown.
How are your creative collaborations with Juliana?
We've done so many different things that I guess it depends on what the project is. We've done parties, big parties together. We've helped each other with each other's work. We worked collaborating on stuff for the House of La Doja. As hectic as it may seem on the outside, and sometimes it is, it's always seamless because we know that we have each other's back. And we have the same goals.
I love the project that you did with her at the new museum.
Oh yeah.
For Trigger.
Yes.
And also I love the idea of using art for social activism in connection with gender.
Mm-hmm. Everything we do is always in some way pointing to politics, but we should kind of, if anything, put a camera or mirror against that, and then also celebrate the House of La Doja and the work we've been doing. So how do we kind of shake people up to be like, look, yes, things are dark now, but they've always been kind of intense, especially for queer families, and the best thing you can do is not forget that it's important to keep the people who you love closest to you, especially if you're queer, to hurdle up, because it's, even if it does get better, and it hopefully will, it's not going to get completely easy overnight. You
were a total pioneer, because now is that we're seeing that non-binary and the fluidity of everything is actually becoming the topic.
Yes.
So
Great.
you did this 20
Yeah.
years ago.
Yes. People weren't so obsessed with language back then. The LGBTQ community, it was sort of us and them. That was it. That's all you needed to know. So when I started developing my look and my identity, I was gender neutral and I was fluid and I was not interested in committing to any kind of box. So I would do public events and there would be pageants and the MC would go, "Are you a boy or a girl?" And I would say neither. That's the only answer I had, was neither. I couldn't say, "Oh, I'm fluid," or "I'm non-binary," or I didn't have that language. And people celebrated that, just that notion of not knowing.
How did you meet Juliana?
She was hanging out with the House of LaDosha, and they were a band at the time.
I guess I'm carrying Bradshaw, Warsaw, fashion, genocide.
And so I had seen her performance, and she was just on the side, go-go dancing. And I saw this amazing person literally on the side of the stage, and I was like, this is all great, but she's the star. And actually, there was someone from a publication there that night, and I made some declaration. I was like, oh, that girl, she's the new it girl. So whatever she's got going on, you need to look at her. I was just drawn to her. I find that a lot with artists who are operating within certain networks. It's like you just recognize it when you see it. It's almost like meeting an old soul, like I've known you forever, even though we've just met. And we had that connection.
What inspires you about this neighborhood?
I think the diversity.
I love Bushwick. I mean, it's very cool.
I mean, I'm also like moved here as an artist. Like I moved here because I liked being in the neighborhood. And so it's weird to see people that move and don't want to see Black or Latino people. I find that to be weird, but that's something that's kind of happening where even like me or Chris will walk into a bar and people get nervous and weird, and it's like, what? It's like, why would you move to Bushwick if you wanted to just put beard wax on?
I think that for what it is worth, at least you keep producing amazing music and photos and videos out of the neighborhood. It's been lovely. Thank you.